Hold your thoughts there, because I do have a very special guest. Sanjay Kapoor joins us live right here on ETNOW. Thanks very much, Sanjay, for being with us. Like somebody said on the show, I think Kunal said it, everybody is breathing a huge sigh of relief that the spectrum sale has finally ended. 19 days, 115 rounds. It's a sale that finally ended. Did you expect the spectrum auction to be as aggressive when it all started off? The industry was saying they have no money, cash flows are going to be a concern. They were saying prices are too high, it's not going to be irrational bidding. All of those fears of the government were actually laid to rest by an industry that put every buck on the table to get the spectrum.
Yes, absolutely. This is an enigma that's going to stay for a bit. I don't think, at least in my mind, I had any doubt that this is going to be a fearful battle, and that's what it turned out to be. And I think government's richer in this auction. Operators have now to plan out what are they going to do next, where do they move the game from here, how do they make a recovery on the investment they've made. I'm sure they are thinking about price hikes, because that is an obvious tool to make sure some amount of investment comes good. My own take is that given the plight of the networks at the current moment, I think India has probably witnessed the poorest quality of networks in the last 12 months or so. And I think if we do not now quickly invest after buying such expensive spectrum on infrastructure, on backhaul, to make sure the consumer experience goes up, then to make the prices go up without a consumer retaliation will probably be a little tough one. Also, we need to see now how quickly India is going to move completely to a digitized network or IP-based network from GSM networks. I don't believe people now retaining their spectrum of 900 megahertz at such expensive prices are going to deploy it for 2G use. I think the minimum layer, at least in the big cities to begin with, will be 3G now on such expensive spectrum. And how do operators move on to this is something to be seen. So I think it's a challenge going ahead, because now monies have to be allocated for supporting this spectrum and improving the customer experience going forward. And price rise is probably one of the most inevitable things that the consumer will have to face.
Fair point, indeed. I was actually going to talk to you about pricing power for telcos, and do you believe this auction, which has been rather expensive, will bring the pricing power back to telcos that have been elusive for so long in a cutthroat competitive industry of telecom in India? Do you believe pricing power is going to return to telecom operators? Do you see material move as far as tariffs are concerned in the next 3, 4, 6 odd months?
Look, first, you have to keep in mind that the entire ecosystem of whether devices or applications or services or internet companies, marketplaces, their performance is contingent to an access network. If the network becomes better, then all these services will earn more, they will perform more, the volumes will go up, and therefore there'll be revenues for the telcos as well. But for all these to catapult into a new dimension, the quality of experience that the consumer enjoys on the networks that we have has to go significantly up. I mean, we had built these networks many years back for voice essentially and SMS. Over time, they are transforming to data and running away from voice and SMS. Now, voice was consumed outdoors and data is consumed indoors. Unless and until our networks begin to be video-grade networks, because that's where the world is moving, and also perform indoors, which is where data gets consumed, I don't think the pricing power can return. The pricing power will only return with these things happening, and then the consumer will probably happily pay. Otherwise, the consumer has no choice. If you up the prices, where does he have to go? You know, it is between a more evil and a lesser evil. So he'll end up paying to one service provider or the other. But truly speaking, I think we as consumers and our country to stay competitive deserves much better grade of networks going forward. Unless and until we concentrate on that, all periphery businesses that depend on a great access network will continue to suffer.
That's a very valid point. I'm not willing to pay more if my calls drop every time I turn a signal. But Sanjay, very quickly, I want to speak to you specifically about Reliance Jio. Everybody said the entry of this particular operator is going to disrupt the telecom landscape in India. They're going to bid for pan-India spectrum. They have been very selective. They've actually concentrated at 800 megahertz. They've put their big bucks behind them, and that is exactly what they've gone behind. Is that a strategy? Is that a pattern that you kind of agree with, that this has not been a disruptive entry of sorts? Fears have again been put to rest, fears that were voiced by a lot of Indian operators?
I must say that Jio has been very focused on LTE, and whatever spectrum they've amassed till now, whether 2.3 gigahertz or 1.8 gigahertz and now 0.8 gigahertz, I think it is all around 4G LTE, and they're focusing on that. Now, there are operator and instances, for example, China Mobile, which actually surpassed the 3G regime essentially and moved on to 4G, and now they are rolling out millions of sites in 4G. So I think clearly Jio seems to be focused on LTE completely, which is probably, as a net result going to be, as envisaged by experts, cheaper and also faster. Well, the detail will lie in the consumer experience that they eventually roll out, because spectrum alone cannot guarantee a great customer experience. So eventually, I think any disruption will be caused by the grade of service and the customer experience that they roll out in the marketplace as and when they launch.
How worried are you about telecom operators like Reliance Communication that have been unable to win back spectrum in 7-odd circles? Do you believe this is a big blow for a company like that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one industry where, at least on the wireless side, one of the most crucial raw materials is spectrum. And given that all spectrum is virtually chock-a-block in this country, and that's why you and I face a lot of dropped calls and lower speeds on data, any amassing of spectrum will lead to future increase in market share. And anybody who loses out in even the existing capacities that he has should be worried, according to me, on what market share loss will he or she face in the coming years. So I think it is a matter of concern, because I think in a spectrum-hungry industry, you need to amass more. We've seen that in countries like Japan, countries like Korea, even US, even 50, 60, 100 megs are falling short of what the consumer's propensity can be to consume data. And here we really still have very small networks with very small spectrum. And if out of that we have to lose out some spectrum, it definitely is something that should give some operators a sleepless night.
Sanjay, just hold your thoughts there, because I want to bring in Nitin back into this discussion. And Nitin, like Sanjay is saying, it should give operators who haven't been able to win back some of their spectrum in existing circles sleepless nights. Does your position on a company like Reliance Communication, I wonder if you have a position there, but does the position on the company change? Does the view on the sector change with spectrum that has not been won by operators in certain circles where they do operate, where they did have spectrum before this sale really began?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that would be a cause of concern, and we'll have to see the details, what circles they have not been able to retain back the spectrum. So, I mean, for them, about 7 circles, they needed to retain the spectrum. And most of these spectrum were actually the low contributor in terms of the revenue for their overall business. So we really have to see what kind of circles they have been not being able to retain back the spectrum. But, I mean, just to make this point, I think we also believe that, after these auctions, I think the pecking order of the industry is quite set. And there could be, some M&As or some consolidation which will happen, which, would rationalize the industry and would lower the industry overcapacity. So we would expect that to happen following this auction.
Fair point indeed. You've actually given me a cue for my next question. And Sanjay, if I may ask you that, do you believe the spectrum sale that has happened, and we're given to understand many more will as and when spectrum is vacated, is this all pointing towards consolidation in the Indian telecom space? Too many to survive, too expensive a spectrum. What's your view on this?
Yes, I think you're right. The big boys have been segregated very clearly. And I think it's easily showing who are the big boys of Indian telecom. But when you look at the global picture where there are 3 or 4 operators in any country, even in those countries, generally about top 2 make money and the bottom 2 struggle to make money. So I think this, for a long-term perspective of the industry, is leading to consolidation undoubtedly. Unless and until government comes out with very liberal spectrum sharing, trading policies, which can further speed up a lot of stuff, I think this is slowly leading towards consolidation undoubtedly.
Fair point indeed. Things slowly leading towards consolidation. Nitin, I have time for one last question with you. Do you agree that things will point towards consolidation, even if spectrum sharing, trading guidelines do come in? They're in the works, but they've been in the works for the longest here in India.
Yes, we believe so. And we have been saying for a long time that this market can only afford 6 telecom companies, which can make, decent profits. So we believe that the smaller operators who still does not make meaningful positive operating profits after years of operation would need to seek some kind of M&As to strengthen their position. And, these auctions have clearly financially crowded out those smaller operators. Pecking order is right there in front of our eyes, with Bharti, Vodafone, Idea, Reliance Communication, and Jio would be the top 5 telcos, and smaller operators would seek some desperate transactions to merge or exit the industry.
Fair point indeed. I'm given to understand I've got Rajan Matthews joining us on the phone line as well to take this entire telecom story forward. Rajan, thanks very much for being with us. I know you were away all the way in Kerala, but we'll bung in very few questions and we'll make them rather fast. The first one is, and I've been asking all my guests, were you taken aback that the spectrum auction actually continued up until the 19th day of sale?
We had expected that it would go on for 3 weeks, principally because of the intense bidding we expected in the 900, given the fact that 800 was also a part of the auction process. So we expected that 3 weeks would be there. Remember that 22 plus circles were up for bid. That itself would ensure a longer time period, given that every circle had to stop bids before it closed.
And how do you explain the stance of telecom operators before the spectrum sale began, that price of the spectrum is way too steep, we cannot bid, bidding is not going to be irrational, and look at the money they put on the table, over 1,09,000 crore rupees?
I don't know that we said that it would not be irrational. I think we said that given the do-or-die nature of the 900 megahertz spectrum, and this was something pointed out by TRAI itself, they said that there is a high risk that the auction bidding process would be skewed in terms of prices. That's exactly what we've seen. Of course, there was a bit of an anomaly or surprise in terms of the levels of 800. But again, as the bidding continued, people saw a real bargain in the 800. So that's what caused the drive up in 800. So overall, I think there was rationality, but extremely high risk for those operators whose business continuity was put at risk.
And we are, of course, talking about operators like a Vodafone and Idea, Bharti. Look at their payout, and it actually does explain the story. Sanjay, we also got Sanjay Kapoor with us, and Rajan, just hold your thoughts there, because I do want to get Sanjay back into this discussion. We're given to understand another round of spectrum sale will happen as and when more spectrum is vacated by defense. Does this auction really set the stage for even higher prices? Because the government will well turn around and say that you said spectrum is way too steeply priced. You still put money on the table. What stops me for charging more for this natural resource? I'm anyways looking at revenue maximization. Sanjay, is that a fear that you share?
I think there are 2 fears going ahead. One, do these auctions set up a higher base price or reserve price for the industry, because government takes this as the benchmark for the next auction and says now the reserve price will be based on these auctions. So that will make the next auctions dearer. And the second is, will government continue to create a scarcity on the spectrum and then put only limited blocks on the auction? Because the biggest deterrent, for people to really go and bid for everything is the amount of spectrum on the table. If there's only one slot, everybody was scared. They were wanting to protect their 900 spectrum, and therefore 2100 was very lackluster. But if tomorrow there are 4 slots available, I'm sure there will be more operators who would want to consume larger chunks of spectrum, because in 3G everybody is starved. We know the 3G services in this country with only one carrier of spectrum, that too not pan-India with all operators, is not enough to service any 3G meaningful service. So I think it's a supply-demand issue. If the government puts in more spectrum on the play, then there'll be a semblance. But if the government uses this auction as a benchmark reserve price, then no matter what you do, it will start at a higher pegging.
All right, higher pegging if this is the benchmark indeed. Rajan, do you have similar concerns? You've actually almost prodded the government to increase prices when the spectrum sale does happen next time around.
So I think,
and by you, I do mean the industry.
No, I think you're right, because that's exactly what the government did with regard to the pricing of 21 megahertz. They said, no, we're going to ignore the recommendation of TRAI. We're going to go back to the 2010 market bid rate and start that as a reserve price. So clearly we see that, and that's probably why you saw not too great an intensity of bidding in the 2100. So yes, going forward, the government, given its past history, will continue to do that, and we believe that they will continue to try and extract more revenue by limiting the amount and quantum of spectrum. So operators are in for a rough ride, not to say that spill over to customers, and innovation is also not going to take a hit.
Fair point indeed. Innovation, customers, I think the material move will have to wait for a while. Completely running out of time here. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us on ETNOW. Sanjay Kapoor and Rajan Matthews, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts on the spectrum sale, which has actually ended after 115 rounds, 19 days. This has been a long drawn process, but there are 2 people who are going to be smiling all the way to the bank, and that those men are really Arun Jaitley and Ravi Shankar Prasad, and they'll perhaps turn around and say, we told you so. It's time for a quick breather here on ETNOW. We come back with plenty more of programming that awaits you.